Hello and welcome to Mindscapes, our series of conversations with men and women whose ideas, vision and philosophy define our contemporary world. My guest today is a distinguished jurist. He's had a long and successful career as a lawyer, as a member of the Supreme Court bench, as the chairman of the National Law Commission, and currently is the chairman of the Press Council of India. I'm delighted to welcome Justice Reddy. Welcome, sir.
Thank you.
You were chairman of the Press Council, and what role does the Press Council really have?
Well, it's a statutory body created in the Press Council Act, and the composition also is laid down under the provisions of the Act. And as per the provisions, the council consists of 28 members, the chairman, and various other categories of members. Shortly, I can say it is to regulate the activities of the media to some extent, but largely to protect the journalists, because their activities are such, unless there is some protection for them, they can't be, transparent and outspoken in their reporting things, etc.
I know this is a large philosophical question, but maybe we can attempt it in a brief program.
Yeah.
What do you see as the role of the media and the role of the journalist that the Press Council really must set out to defend, protect?
Largely said, as we're all aware, the freedom of press gives a definite articulation to the fundamental right, namely the freedom of speech. To put it in a different way, they have their fingers on the pulse of the people. So whatever they do should be ultimately in the interest of the public and the integrity of the nation. Of course, in doing so, they do indulge in certain activism. It is that activism which can be constructive, which can be otherwise also. So, a journalist has a onerous duty, and if I may say so, he is given certain power, and power is a trust. So he must be conscious about that, because he is given power to report certain things. That doesn't mean that he can be erratic. He must be circumspect, keeping in view the morals to the extent which he has to observe in reporting the matters, and ultimately, basically, keep in view the public interest. That's the most important.
So you've really focused on the aspects of responsibility, of obligation. What are the mechanisms of accountability that journalists must also have?
So far the Press Council is concerned, I may tell you, we do get a number of complaints against the newspapers, against the journalists, and vice versa, and where the journalists also are not properly treated or prevented, or violence is used. Perhaps you are aware, recently our committee went to Chennai to inquire into the incidents that happened, and they have given a report which is under scrutiny. So that way they have important duties to perform, and in doing so, of course, they have to be objective, and naturally a little bit of what you call, they may add certain things, but that's only to give a shape to the item so that the public can understand and at the same time appreciate the report or the background of the report.
Would it be fair to describe the Press Council as a watchdog body that looks both at the obligations of the journalists to be fair and in their reporting, some elements like the right to respond when you're making a criticism about somebody else, to look at issues of plagiarism, equally to ensure that the journalists are responsible in what they do, are accountable, and fair and balanced. Now, in what ways does the Press Council seek to do this? It lays down guidelines, it responds to complaints. What are the mechanisms that the Press Council uses to ensure that it's a level, fair playing field for both sides, both the journalist and the people that they're reporting or talking about?
Well, you have put so far the duties are concerned very succinctly. And so far the Press Council is concerned, there are guidelines given already. And naturally we expect the journalists to keep in view these guidelines. And of course, sometimes the situation is such that they have to rise to the occasion. And in doing so, how objectively exercises discretion in making his observations, and to have a first-hand knowledge, naturally he has to present himself there. In doing so, also how far he has observed his discretion and the possible restraint, because many a time we find when some accused are being produced in the court, I have seen on the TV, watch TV, the aggression with which they hover around the person in custody, perhaps that may suffer a setback in his health also. It's not necessary to go to that extent. The fellow is already undergoing an agony, and as the jurisprudence says, basically that everybody is presumed to be innocent till is convicted. So merely because he is being taken to the court, and I think you must have seen on the TV some of this.
So are you planning? This is something that people are deeply anguished about in India. And really here in your hat, both as a former judge of the Supreme Court, that very often we have. People are charge-sheeted, people get into a supposed investigation and nothing happens. They're neither pronounced guilty nor they're pronounced innocent, and this sort of hangs over their heads. Are you looking at some mechanisms through the Press Council that trial by media doesn't happen so vigorously?
No, I know you are leading to a point. See, the trial can be only by the court. See, so far the media is concerned as to what is happening, they can simply report. But the verdict lies with the court. I don't think anybody else can try and give a verdict. As far as possible, not only the media, but anybody else also. For instance, you can't hold a conference and then declare that so-and-so is. So it must be left, after all, judiciary has got its own important role to play, and the Constitution has given an important place to the judiciary, so for the working of the executive, and the crimes being tried. So you have to repose confidence in the court and then leave it to the court. You can't go by results and then say, no, you are not trying properly, rather we will try.
But in the public perception, very often, because the judicial process takes time, and that's another question for another discussion later in the program perhaps, the opinion or the verdict of the media that person X, by implication or otherwise, is responsible for a crime or not responsible for a crime, is very much, what is sort of what hangs over the head of the accused. So, in your incarnation at the Press Council, are you looking at mechanisms? For example, in many Western countries, when Colin Powell was describing Osama bin Laden the other day on television, he said, well, this gentleman is someone we should go after. And then he corrected himself, well, maybe it's not fair to describe him as a gentleman. So, the established press will always refer to someone who's been charged as Mr. So-and-so and an alleged criminal or an accused, whatever, in furtherance to the doctrine that you mentioned, that a person is innocent until proved guilty. This isn't a practice that our press really follows. And so very often we have sensational stories of people who are decreed guilty by the press and then nothing happens. Do you wait for that person to come and complain to you, or are you able to go back and then say, well, this is a practice that we discourage because it's not fair or it's not correct?
Well, so far to my knowledge, no such instances have been examined by the press council in the sense to stop the media when in an ongoing trial about their reporting or expressing their views. But if somebody comes and reports, we don't know, we have to do something about it. We have to do something about it.
I think also in this interface...
Particularly, I would add, let us leave aside the newspapers at the national level and editors of which are very knowledgeable people, renowned, and I am very happy about the editors who are editing this, dailies at the national level. But imagine at a taluk level or a district level, if a paper like that in a given case, because it is something sensational local, but sensationalism doesn't mean everybody involved, whoever is charged treated is an accused. It can do a lot of havoc. Sometimes it may result even law and order problems also. So, there is what is called a Lakshmana Rekha.
You have been, on the bench of the Supreme Court in a formal judicial authority, and the press council is a quasi-judicial body. What does it mean to be a quasi-judicial body? In what ways are you able to implement your decisions and your verdicts?
So, for press council is concerned, I say quasi-judicial, if I may say so. Most of the executives who are hearing certain appeals, revisions in revenue laws and all that are all termed as quasi-judicial bodies. In the sense, they are not a court as such, because in a court there is a certain procedure. As a matter of fact, the defendant, plaintiff, defendant, so adversarial, so on and so forth. But in a matters before quasi-judicial bodies, they have to apply their mind as though he is a judicial body, though it is not strictly judicial in the sense it's not a court. And if these quasi-judicial bodies, in general, if I may say so, act well, much of the litigation may not be there at all. For instance, a head of a department is to act in a quasi-judicial body and passing an order on a file. It's because he is adjudicating to that extent. So, likewise, coming to the press council also, we have what is called inquiry committees. Suppose a complaint comes to us, we give notice, we hear both sides. That means audi alteram partem, that is the basic thing is observed, and we examine the merits and then give our verdict, whatever it is, in that sense.
And does the verdict have the statutory authority of law? Is it enforceable?
Well, see, every verdict should result in some punishment if it is a criminal case, if it is a civil case, in some decree. So, for the press council is concerned, if I may so say, it's a severe most, it is only censure. Otherwise, it's only an admonition, something like that. So, that's why there have been a kind of a feeling or a rather opinion seriously also put forward that press council needs more teeth. Otherwise, a censure or some of these things, how far they would take it, and what is its effect. After all, if something, a misdeed or a misdemeanor is complained and which is the subject matter of inquiry before the committee, and the press council gives its verdict is admonition and then censure, something like that. Or for instance, I may tell you, I came across in this few days cases. Suppose a paper, particularly the Mofasal, they publish certain item and somebody contradicts it, saying it is not correct, it is something else. So we ask the paper, you see, please publish his version also, so that the matter ends. They won't publish. So there will be another complaint saying they have not published and they have not implemented the direction of the press council. So there is a gray area so for the press council exercising its powers to see that these things are enforced as compared to a decree of a court. So there's some amendments may be necessary, or rather necessary, I would say, in my view, especially the ongoing changes that are we are going to have.
Looking at this issue of change, with the advent of convergence and new technologies, the nature of the press, the nature of the media, the essential principles have changed. There has been some talk in Parliament and in the press about a media council replacing the press council, because the press council is really just, well, was designed to look at the printed media, and that this might change. In this sort of rapidly changing scenario, what agendas, what future do you see for the press council? What changes do you feel you might need to initiate to keep the press council relevant?
Well, I would suggest this is a matter to be examined in depth. Perhaps a press commission may be necessary to be appointed and looking into all aspects. Perhaps a person like you can be there in the commission and then give some guidelines and all that, where of course we will also be there. It is a very, very, a measure which we have to examine now. A time has come, because this act was passed in 1976, and if you take what has happened all these years, as I told you, the punishments that are given, or I would say, even assuming it's only a regulatory body, even then certain regulations or some guidelines which are given this press council have to be observed, have to be implemented. Are we able to see that they are implemented strictly is the question. If there is no implementation, then what is to be done? Enquiries. Enquiry results in sort of a verdict. Then what follows? That is the important thing.
What has been the relationship between the press and the judiciary? In a sense that the judiciary has had the protection of their very sacrosanct position, and also sort of the judicial proceedings have had the protection of something being sub judice. What have you seen, now that you're in a sense on the other side, you're also looking at the rights of the press, how have you seen this relationship emerge in India?
Oh, perhaps before answering that question, as the saying goes, once a mortgage, always a mortgage. You say once a judge is always a judge. But let's say that's apart. I may answer your question in this manner. Namely, a court is an institution. I would call it a sacred institution. And a presiding officer, we have to take it in an objective, dispassionate manner, decides a case. He may go wrong. Or even in cases he is right also, the criticism would be there, because one party or other is to be, will get affected. So far the press is concerned, in criticizing those judgments, you have to see that the integrity of the institution is not affected. You can give a fair criticism, absolutely no problem at all. An interpretation of a particular provision of law can be said, because there are legal experts in the media also. So they can say that this view is absolutely wrong. You find in newspapers about these important cases, especially legal luminaries criticizing the judgments. There's nothing wrong with that. But only thing is, anything said to affect the integrity of the institution, that's how what's the contempt of court. The protection is only to that extent. And I must say, but don't say that I'm again, but our judges were very circumspect in exercising this contempt jurisdiction. Only it may be a check on some people who can't contain themselves enough, or who have no proper perspectives in appreciating the functioning of the judiciary. Only to those people this restraints, not other persons. You can always criticize in seminars. On the other hand, you have been writing articles in the newspapers about this thing. So the press can be, there is no doubt, I don't say that they are shut out.
The judiciary, like the press, are operating, and let's focus on the press because you're here really in your incarnation as the chairman of the Press Council, are operating in a larger social context where we perceive a decline in values. And apart from just looking at the purely legalistic interpretation of whether the journalist is honoring his responsibilities and his obligations in terms of the right of response or fair reporting or what have you, journalism and the media are also promoting, perpetuating values in a much larger context. What role do you see for a regulatory authority or a watchdog authority or advisory in whichever way you may sort of formulate or position or reposition the Press Council? What kind of role do you think it can play in this realm?
In the realm of?
Values that implicitly the media holds out, whether it's attitude to women, to child pornography, to corrupt politicians, to a whole range of social.
As a matter of fact, we are holding the Press Council meetings once in a month or once in 6 weeks, and we drop an agenda. And in the agenda, some of these aspects which you have rightly mentioned will figure for discussion. And as I already told you, the council consists of very eminent people belong to media, let it be editorial side or managemental side or the journalist side, and apart from that, members of the parliament. So we do discuss these things, and we hold seminars also on these aspects. For instance, women, then investigation by the journalists, and for instance, last year we had this catastrophes, and then what's the role of the media. So the media's activities, as you know, are multifarious. They can touch upon the various aspects which are of national importance. So speaking for myself, I would welcome the media to concentrate on the general these things which the nation in its own interests has to evolve, and in a way how the media also can give some kind of guidance and enlightenment to the concerned people. So for Press Council is concerned, we do try to ventilate these things, and with the help of the media in the seminars we hold and the discussions we have in our Press Council meetings. And apart from that, as you are aware, many of these active NGOs, non-governmental organizations, they do organize seminars where meaningful deliberations are made on some of these aspects. And perhaps shortly we may have on November 14th on 1 or 2 important aspects of this nature, and the Press Council will be involving itself and then requesting people who are very familiar with these aspects, and perhaps you will be also be there.
Might we anticipate sort of Press Council guidelines, recommendations, which are, well, may not be sort of statutory and binding, but at least set yardsticks?
Yes, we have issued guidelines. The previous chairman have issued guidelines, and perhaps the present commission also will again examine, because the changing scenario, if we can add something more to those guidelines. But effect of this guidelines, as you said, the moral obligation, suppose we are all family, right. See the moral obligations as a family which one need not, can't enforce in the sense as a provision of law. But certain things, I would say, the moral obligations, they applies to everybody. As I said, if some power is given, it is a trust. And how can one say guidelines in an exhaustive manner, what you have to do, what you have not to do? So perhaps in every situation one has to applies the guidelines which his conscience tells also, including for a judge.
You're also sort of, in your incarnation as chairman of the Press Council, you also have a role to play in what happens with the future of public broadcasting, in a sense, with the Prasar Bharati, the selection procedures which have been long pending.
As it is, we have no, the Press Council has nothing much to do with electronic media or broadcasting and all that. In the matter of selection, naturally, objectively, whatever role the Press Council chairman has to play, it will be done. But he is not by himself an individual who can do it. Perhaps I know what you are.
We just wondered if there was anything happening.
No, it may happen. It may happen.
What when you sort of when you complete your term as the head of the Press Council, and you've been there some weeks, what would you like to say or feel that you have achieved?
Don't you think it's too early to say?
Well, your vision for your term, in a general sense.
Well, I'll be the happiest person if I can succeed in emulating certain principles which the media have to follow, and that would be mostly in the interest of the nation and the interest of the public. In that direction, if I could introduce certain measures, of course with the help and cooperation of the concerned people, including the members of the council as well as the media people, and minimum at least the image is kept up, and of course I will be the happiest if the image is improved.
That's great. Thank you very much. This has been a great pleasure, and amen to that.
Which enable us to access space in a cost-effective and assured way. So this is the third. So I see all the three possible well within the next decade.
Dr. Kasturangan, thank you very much. This has been a great privilege. Thank you.